"Pretend to be my bride," the Duke of Ravenscar said, "for one night, and I will pay your grandmother's debts and never trouble you again." And Clara Whitfield, who had come out to the terrace to escape a party that despised her, decided the man had lost his mind. She had been standing alone in the dark, as she always stood alone at these things, when he had come through the glass doors like a storm looking for somewhere to break. She knew who he was, of course. Everyone knew the Duke of Ravenscar, the cold, ferocious, immensely rich Duke, whom the whole house party had been circling all week, like gulls round a fishing boat. She had watched him from her corner, the way she watched everyone, being an invisible sort of person, a poor relation of the hostess, brought to Ashcombe Park to make up numbers and be grateful, 23, and dowerless, and so far beneath the notice of a duke that he had walked past her a dozen times that week, without his eyes so much as snagging. And now he was standing in front of her in the dark, having plainly not the faintest idea who she was, asking her to be his bride. "I beg your pardon, Your Grace," Clara said, "but I think you have mistaken me for someone who has any notion what you are talking about, or possibly for someone who is drunk. I am neither. Good evening." "Wait." He put out a hand, not touching her, just stopping her. In the light from the windows, she could see his face now, and it was not the face of a drunk man. It was the face of a man at the end of his rope, which she recognized, having worn it herself. "Forgive me. I am doing this very badly. I have perhaps 90 seconds before that door opens and my life becomes considerably worse. So I am going to speak plainly and quickly, and you are going to think me mad, and I am sorry for it. Do you know who is in that drawing room?" "A great many people who would faint to see you talking to me," Clara said. "Lady Sybil Carow is in that drawing room," the Duke said, "and her mother, the Countess of Marsh, who has spent the entire week maneuvering toward a single moment, which will occur in approximately 1 minute, when the Countess intends to arrange for myself and Lady Sybil to be discovered alone in the conservatory. She has bribed my valet. I have only just learned it, and a footman, and half the household, so that I will be compromised into offering for a young woman I have met 4 times and cannot abide, whose chief ambition is to be a duchess, and whose chief quality is a talent for arranging to be found in conservatories. It is a trap, and it is a good one, and by the rules of our world, once she is discovered alone with me, I will have no honorable choice but to marry her, and I will spend the rest of my life shackled to a woman who wants my title and despises my person, because I was too slow to see the net closing." His jaw was tight. "Unless, when that door opens, I am already discovered, on this terrace, alone in the dark, with a young lady to whom I am, it will transpire, already secretly engaged, a prior attachment, one that makes the conservatory scheme not only pointless, but a scandalous embarrassment to the Countess who sprung it. Do you see? I do not need to marry you. I need, for one evening, to have already promised myself to someone else. And you are the only person on this terrace, and I am out of time, and I am asking you, I am begging you, which I have not done since I was a boy, to be that someone, for one night, and let me pay you handsomely for the rescue. Your name, quickly. What is your name?" "Clara Whitfield," Clara said, too astonished to do anything but answer. "Clara Whitfield. Miss Whitfield, will you save me? One night. When that door opens, you are my betrothed, secretly promised these 2 months, and we came out here to be alone, and you will let me be, visibly, unmistakably, a man already spoken for. I will handle everything after, and I will pay your—" "You said something. Before, you flinched. You have a difficulty. Money. Everyone has a difficulty. Tell me yours and I will make it vanish. Tonight, in exchange for 90 seconds of your courage. I know how this sounds. I have no time to make it sound better. Yes or no, Miss Whitfield? The door is about to open." And Clara Whitfield, poor, invisible, 23, with a grandmother at home, slowly drowning in the debts Clara's late father had left, and no way on God's earth to save her, looked at the desperate Duke and did the arithmetic of her whole life in a single second, and made the maddest decision she had ever made. "My grandmother," she said, "owes £400 to a man who means to take her cottage. That is my difficulty. If you are lying to me, or laughing at me, Your Grace, I will never forgive you as long as I live, and if you are not—" The glass doors opened. Light spilled out onto the terrace, and voices, and the head of the little procession the Countess of Marsh had so carefully arranged. The Countess herself, and Lady Sybil in her conservatory white gown, and a knot of chosen witnesses primed to gasp at the right moment, all of them sweeping out to find the Duke of Ravenscar exactly where the bribed valet had said he would be. They found him, but he was not alone in the compromising dark waiting to be trapped. He was standing close beside a young woman in a plain blue gown, holding her hand in both of his dark head bent to hers, in the unmistakable attitude of a man interrupted in a tender private moment. And as every eye fell on them, the Duke of Ravenscar straightened and drew Clara Whitfield's hand through his arm, and said, in a voice of cool, ringing clarity that carried to the very back of the gawking crowd, "Ah, Lady Marsh, you find us out. I had hoped to make the announcement properly, but since we are all here, allow me to present Miss Clara Whitfield, to whom I have had the very great honor of being secretly engaged these 2 months past. We came out to steal a moment alone. I am sure, as a romantic, you will understand." He smiled, and it was not a warm smile. It was the smile of a man who has just turned a trap inside out and closed it on the trapper. "Do wish us joy." Clara watched the Countess of Marsh's face go through 4 distinct colors. She watched Lady Sybil's conservatory white composure crack straight across. She watched the primed witnesses, who had come to gasp at a compromise, gasp instead at a betrothal, which is a very different gasp and could not now be taken back. And she understood, with a kind of vertigo, that she had just, in 90 seconds, in a plain blue gown, for £400 she desperately needed, become the secret fiancée of the Duke of Ravenscar in front of the most gossip-hungry house party in England, and that there was no possible way this was going to be as simple as one night. "Joy," said the Countess of Marsh through her teeth. "What a delightful surprise." "Isn't it?" said the Duke of Ravenscar, and pressed Clara's trembling hand against his arm. "We think so. The trouble with a lie told to a room full of gossips is that it does not stay in the room." Clara understood the scale of what they had done within the hour, as the news of the Duke of Ravenscar's secret engagement to an unknown Miss Whitfield swept through Ashcombe Park and out, by the morning post, toward London. There was no quiet way to undo it. A secret engagement, announced before 40 witnesses, could not simply evaporate the next morning without making the Duke a liar, and Clara a woman who had been jilted, or had jilted a Duke, either of which would follow her the rest of her life. The lie had grown legs the moment it left the terrace, and it was running now, and they were both obliged to run after it. The Duke came to find her the next morning, in the small parlor where the hostess had grudgingly allowed the poor relation to sit, and he shut the door, and for the first time Clara saw him not as a storm but as a man, a tired, formidable, oddly courteous man who had gotten them both into something and knew it. "Miss Whitfield," he said, "I owe you an apology and an explanation, and, it now appears, a rather larger favor than I asked for last night, and I find I do not quite know where to begin, so I will begin with the money, because it is the thing I promised, and the thing I can simply do." He set a folded paper on the table between them. "Your grandmother's debt, £400. It is paid, as of this morning. I sent a man at dawn. The cottage is safe. Whatever else comes of last night's madness, that at least is done. And it is done whether or not you ever speak to me again. So you need not feel you owe me anything for it. It was the price of your courage and you earned it, and it is yours." Clara stared at the paper. £400. Her grandmother's whole security. The terror that had sat on Clara's chest for 2 years, dissolved overnight by a stranger she had known for one evening. "You did that," she said, "already. Before you knew whether I would keep, whether I would go on pretending, you paid it first." "I told you I would," the Duke said, as though it were obvious. "I do not lie to the people who help me, Miss Whitfield. I lie to countesses who try to trap me into marriage, which I regard as self-defense. But I do not lie to you. You saved me last night from a fate I would genuinely rather have died than face, and I said I would pay your grandmother's debt, and so it is paid. And now we are square, and everything that comes next is a separate matter, which you are entirely free to refuse." He sat down across from her. "But I am afraid there is a next, and it is this. The lie has traveled. By tonight, it will be in London. A secret engagement cannot be quietly dissolved the morning after it is announced, without ruining one or both of us. You would be branded, and I would be branded a liar and a cad, and the Countess of Marsh, who is furious and vengeful and has a very long reach, would make quite certain that the version told everywhere was the one most damaging to you. So we cannot simply stop. What I am asking now, and you may refuse, and I will protect you either way, is that we continue the engagement a little longer. Weeks, not years. Long enough that when it ends, it can end respectably, by mutual agreement, a quiet dissolving that harms no one, rather than a scandal the morning after. You would be, for a season, the betrothed of the Duke of Ravenscar. I would settle a proper sum on you for it, enough that you and your grandmother need never be poor again. And at the end, we would part as friends, and you would be a young woman of independent means who was once engaged to a duke, which does a reputation no harm at all, and I would be free of the Countess forever. That is the proposal. The real one, this time, in daylight. Will you go on being my bride, Miss Whitfield? Pretend, still, but for longer, and let me make you secure for life in exchange." And Clara Whitfield, looking at the folded paper that had already saved her grandmother, understood that she was being offered the impossible thing that never happens to invisible poor relations. A way out. Not a small way, a total one. Security for life, for herself and the grandmother she loved, in exchange for a few weeks of playing a part. She should have felt only relief. She did feel relief. But she felt, underneath it, a small, cold warning she could not quite name. A sense that a few weeks of pretending to be loved by a man like this was a dangerous thing to do, to a heart that had never been loved at all, and that she was agreeing to something whose true price would not be counted in weeks or pounds. She agreed anyway. Of course she agreed. A woman drowning does not refuse the rope because she fears she may come to like the man holding it. "Yes," Clara said, "for my grandmother, for the security. Yes, Your Grace, I will go on being your bride until we can end it respectably." She lifted her chin. "But I will ask one thing in return, beyond the money, and it is not negotiable. You will be honest with me, always, in private, between us, whatever we perform for the world. You will never lie to me, and you will never make me a fool, and you will tell me the truth, even when it is unwelcome. I have spent my whole life being managed and overlooked by people who thought me too small to be dealt with honestly, and I will not spend even these few weeks being managed by you. If we are to be partners in a lie, we will be honest partners, at least with each other. Those are my terms." The Duke of Ravenscar looked at the poor relation in the plain blue gown who had just, calmly, set conditions on a duke, and something moved in his cold face that Clara could not read. "Those," he said, "are the best terms anyone has offered me in years. I accept them. Honesty between us, always, whatever we show the world. My hand on it, Miss Whitfield." And he held out his hand across the table, gravely, as though sealing a treaty between equals, and Clara took it, and neither of them knew that they had just agreed to the one condition guaranteed to turn a pretense into something real, because there is nothing on earth more dangerous to two guarded hearts than the promise to be, with each other and no one else, entirely honest. They were, everyone agreed, a most convincing couple. That was the thing that undid them, in the end. They were too good at it. To sell the engagement to a watching world, the Duke of Ravenscar had to be seen to court Clara Whitfield, to seek her out, to bend his dark head to hers, to dance with her, to walk with her in the gardens where the whole house party could see, to look at her, in public, the way a man looks at the woman he has secretly loved for 2 months. And Clara, to hold up her end, had to look back. So they performed it, the tender glances, the private smiles, the hand at the small of her back, and it was all pretense, entirely pretense. And the terrible thing about pretending to love someone is that the body does not always know it is pretending, and the heart knows even less. The first time they danced as an engaged couple, Clara understood the trap they had built for themselves. It was at a county assembly, the week after the terrace, their first public outing as the Duke and his secret bride, and the whole room watched them take the floor. Clara had braced herself to perform, to arrange her face into a love-struck expression, to play the part convincingly enough to protect them both. What she had not braced herself for was the Duke's hand at the small of her back, warm and certain, or the way he drew her into the frame of the waltz as though she were something precious, or the fact that a man who did everything coldly did not, it turned out, dance coldly at all. "You are frightened," he murmured, for her ear alone as they turned. "Do not be. You need only follow. I will not let you stumble, in this or in anything. That is the whole of the bargain. I keep you safe, you keep me free. Trust the frame. Look at me as though you are fond of me. It is only acting." "I have never danced with a duke," Clara admitted, low. "I have never danced with anyone. Poor relations are not asked. I have watched 1,000 waltzes from the wall, and I do not actually know how." "You are doing it now," he said, and there was something in his voice, surprise and warmth together. "You have been doing it for a full minute. You are a natural, Miss Whitfield. Or else you have watched from that wall so closely that you learned every step you were never invited to take, which is the more likely and the more to your credit. Either way, look, the whole room believes we are in love. You are performing beautifully." But that was the thing. Clara looked up at him to perform being fond, and found she did not have to perform it, because somewhere in the turning warmth of the dance, the performance and the truth had quietly changed places, and the fondness in her face was real, and she could see, or thought she could see, and did not dare believe, an answering realness in his. They danced the whole waltz in a silence that was not the silence of two people playing a part, but the far more dangerous silence of two people who have forgotten there is anyone watching. And when the music ended, and the room broke into approving murmurs at the handsome, besotted couple, the Duke did not immediately release her, and Clara did not immediately step back, and for one heartbeat too long they simply stood in the center of the floor looking at each other, until the Duke recovered himself and bowed over her hand with a courtly flourish entirely for the crowd. And the moment was papered over, and only the two of them knew that something real had slipped through the pretense, and neither had quite managed to catch it and put it back. "That," the Duke said afterward, handing her a glass of lemonade with perfect public correctness, his voice pitched under the noise, "was very convincing." "Yes," Clara said, not looking at him, her heart going far too fast. "Very. We are good at this, Your Grace. Perhaps too good. We should be careful." Careful of what? She had almost said it. Careful of forgetting it is pretend. Careful of me. She swallowed it, the way she swallowed everything, and gave him the safe answer. Careful that we do not overplay it and make the world suspicious. A little restraint, going forward. We would not want to be too convincing. And the Duke had agreed, gravely, that a little restraint would be wise. And neither of them had managed the smallest particle of restraint at any point thereafter, because you cannot dance with someone the way they had danced and then be restrained. And every subsequent performance was a little more real than the last, and the lie grew truer by the week, while they both went on solemnly assuring each other it was only very good acting. But it was not the public performance that betrayed them. It was the private honesty. It was the terms Clara had set. Because between the performances there were the real hours, the hours when the audience was gone, and the two of them could stop acting, and in those hours, bound by their pact to be honest with each other and no one else, the Duke of Ravenscar and Clara Whitfield did a thing neither had done with another living soul. They told the truth. He told her, over cards in the empty library at midnight, why he so hated to be wanted for his title, the whole cold history of it, the calculating mother who had never loved him, the friends who had turned out to be creditors, the slow armoring of a boy who learned that everyone who smiled at him wanted something. And Clara told him what it was to be invisible, to be the poor relation brought to make up numbers, to be spoken past and looked through, to have learned to want nothing, because wanting was a door the world only ever slammed. And each of them, listening, recognized the other. The Duke, whom everyone wanted, and the woman, whom no one saw, discovered that they were the same loneliness wearing opposite clothes. That to be wanted only for what you have, and to be wanted by no one at all, are two faces of the identical solitude, which is the solitude of never being seen for yourself. And they saw each other. That was the whole catastrophe. Bound to honesty, in the stolen private hours, they became the only two people in England who saw each other plainly, wanted nothing false from each other, and could be, at last, entirely themselves. It was the thing each of them had wanted their whole lives without knowing its name, and they had agreed to end it, respectably, in a few weeks. Clara knew she was in trouble long before she admitted it. She knew it the night the Duke, telling her some dry story of his childhood, made her laugh so hard she forgot to be careful, and she saw him watch her laugh with an expression that was not part of any performance, because there was no one there to perform for. It was midnight, and the library was empty, and he looked at her laughing as though she were the first warm thing in a cold year, and Clara's heart turned over, and she thought, with genuine fear, oh no, I am doing exactly the thing I was afraid of. I am falling in love with a man who is paying me to pretend he loves me, and when it ends I will have the money and the security, and a hole in me shaped exactly like these midnight hours, and no one to blame but myself, because he was honest with me from the start. He told me it was pretend, and I agreed, and I have gone and made it real inside my own chest, where he cannot even see it. She resolved to guard herself. She was very good at guarding herself. She had done it her whole life, but she had never before had to guard herself against someone who was, by solemn agreement, being completely honest with her. And honesty is the one weapon guardedness has no defense against. And every midnight, the wall came down a little further, and she could not stop it, and she began, quietly, to dread the respectable ending she had agreed to as though it were a death. There was one midnight that brought them nearer the edge than either dared to go. It was late, the ball long over, the great house asleep, and Clara had come down to the library for a book, to quiet a mind that would not rest, and found the Duke already there, in his shirt sleeves before the dying fire, a decanter, untouched at his elbow, staring into the coals. He did not send her away. He never sent her away. He only moved along the settle to make room, and she sat, and for a while they said nothing, which had become its own kind of intimacy. There is a thing I have never told anyone, he said at last, into the fire. I will tell you, because we agreed to be honest, and because it is midnight, and you are the only person I have ever wanted to tell. When I was a boy, I used to lie awake and invent a person, a companion who was not after anything, who did not want the estate, or the influence, or to be seen with the Duke's son, just someone who liked me. I gave her conversations. I was perhaps 10. It is the most pathetic thing I have ever confessed, and I have carried it 30 years. He turned his head and looked at her, and the firelight was on his face, and there was no armor left in it at all. And these last weeks, Clara, in this room, at this hour, I keep thinking of that invented person, because I made her up because I did not believe she could exist. And then I bought a pretend bride to save myself from a trap, and it turns out I was rescued by something else entirely, and I do not have a name for it, and it frightens me more than the Countess ever could. Clara sat very still. The stillness she used to hold back the thing too large to say, and every instinct of 5 guarded years told her to turn it aside, to make the light joke, to protect herself. She very nearly did. You were not rescued by anything, she made herself say, lightly, though her voice was not quite steady. You were rescued by a poor relation who needed £400. Do not make me into your boyhood companion, Your Grace. I am a great deal more ordinary and a great deal more mercenary, and if you begin to imagine otherwise, you will only be disappointed. And she stopped, because he was looking at her, and she could not finish the lie under that look. You are the least ordinary and least mercenary person I have ever met, the Duke said quietly, and you know it. And you are doing the thing you do, going still, turning it aside, making yourself small so that no one can take anything from you. I know the trick, Clara. I invented my own version of it, and I am asking you, just once, just here, where no one can see, not to do it. Tell me one true thing. Not for the performance. For me. We agreed to be honest with each other and no one else. So be honest. This once. All the way. Are these midnights only a bargain to you? Because they have stopped being one to me. And I have been too much a coward to say so. And I find at this particular midnight, I cannot be a coward for one more hour. And there it was. The door standing open. The whole truth an inch from her lips. The thing she had ached to say for weeks. Clara looked at him and felt herself sway toward it like a woman toward a cliff edge. And then the old fear closed over her. The fear of the poor relation who has learned that hope is only a slower way of being hurt. The certainty that a duke who says such things at midnight cannot possibly mean them the way she would mean them. That he was lonely, and the fire was warm, and in the daylight he would remember what she was. And she drew back from the edge at the last possible instant, and gave him not the truth but the safest thing near it. They have stopped being only a bargain to me too, she said, which was true, and far less than the truth, and the most she could risk. You have become my friend, your grace. The first real one I have had. That is worth more to me than the 400 pounds, and I will be sorry to lose it when this ends. There, that is an honest thing. Let it be enough, please. It is very late, and some truths are too heavy to lift at midnight, and I find I cannot lift the rest of mine tonight without dropping it on us both. The Duke of Ravenscar looked at her a long moment and understood, being fluent in exactly her language, that she had come to the edge and stepped back, and that there was more behind the word friend than she would say, and that he had no right to force it from a woman who had every reason to protect herself from a man in his position. So he let her keep her wall, though it cost him, because he loved her, and love does not batter down the defenses of the beloved. It waits for them to be laid down freely. It is enough, he said gently, though it was not, for either of them. Friend, then. Good night, Clara. Take your book, and thank you for the honest thing, small as you would have it. It was more than anyone else has given me in 30 years, and I shall lie awake being glad of it, exactly as I did when I was 10, and inventing you. And Clara went up to bed with her book, and lay awake half the night, hating her own cowardice. And the Duke sat by the dying fire hating his, and both of them, a floor apart, loved the other entirely, and were certain it was not returned. And the wall that neither would be the first to lower, stood one more night between them, until the Countess of Marsh, all unknowing, was kind enough to knock it down for good. What she did not know, what she could not know, because it was the one thing their honesty pact did not cover, the two of them having agreed to be honest about everything except the single thing that mattered, was that the Duke of Ravenscar had fallen exactly as far, and exactly as helplessly, and was guarding himself against precisely the same catastrophe, and was every bit as certain that his feeling was one-sided. He had reasoned it out, in his cold, careful way, and reached a conclusion that did Clara enormous credit, and made him thoroughly miserable. She had agreed to this for her grandmother, he told himself. She had been drowning, and he had thrown her a rope, and she had taken it, and it would be the lowest kind of dishonor to now use the rescue as leverage on her heart. To let a woman who had agreed to a business arrangement, out of desperate need, feel that she was expected to develop real feelings for the wealthy man who held her security in his hands. That would make him exactly the sort of man who traps a woman he wants into a marriage she cannot refuse, which was the very thing he had recruited Clara to save him from. The Countess of Marsh had tried to trap him. He would rather die than trap Clara. And so the more he came to love her, and he did love her, entirely, the first honest love of his armored life, the more scrupulously he hid it, because to reveal it would be to put an unbearable pressure on a woman who had only ever agreed to pretend, and who was free, and whom he loved too much to make anything less than free. Two people then, each in love, each certain the other was only pretending, each nobly determined to hide it to protect the other, bound by a pact of honesty that they had, at the crucial point, both quietly broken, for the kindest possible reasons, to the ruin of both their happiness. It could not have gone on forever, and it did not, and the thing that broke it was the Countess of Marsh, who had not, of course, forgiven either of them, and who had spent the weeks since the terrace hunting for the one weapon that would destroy them both. She found it. She found out the truth. It was not difficult, in the end, for a determined and vengeful woman with money and spies. She traced Clara's history, the poverty, the grandmother, the debts. She found the moneylender whose £400 had been so suddenly and mysteriously paid. She put it together, as a clever, cruel woman will, and she understood, correctly, that the secret engagement had not been secret at all but sudden, that the poor relation had been penniless one day, and the Duke's betrothed the next, that money had changed hands, and she drew from it the ugliest possible conclusion, and she prepared to announce it, at the largest gathering she could arrange, in the most humiliating possible terms. That the Duke of Ravenscar's romantic secret engagement was a sham, a paid arrangement, that he had bought a desperate girl to escape an honest match, and that Miss Clara Whitfield was not a bride at all, but a hired fraud who had sold herself for £400. It was, very nearly, the truth. That was what made it so deadly. And the Countess chose her moment with exquisite malice. The Ashcombe Ball, the grandest night of the season, with all the world watching, the very stage on which the engagement had first been performed. The Ashcombe Ball was at its height when the Countess of Marsh struck. She did it beautifully, which is to say, monstrously. She waited until the great room was full, and the music paused, until the Duke and Clara stood together near the center of the floor, in plain view of all society. And then she raised her carrying voice, the voice of a woman who has practiced her cruelty and means to be heard in the farthest corner. And she said, with a smile of pure poison, "Your Grace, before you and dear Miss Whitfield are wed, I wonder that you do not tell your friends the charming story of your courtship, how you met, how you became engaged so very suddenly, a woman no one had heard of, penniless one week, betrothed to a duke the next. Or shall I tell it? For I have made some inquiries, and it is such an instructive tale." She turned to the room, and the room, sensing blood, went silent to hear her. Miss Whitfield came to Ashcombe a fortnight ago, a pauper, a poor relation with a grandmother drowning in debt, and the very night of the Duke's supposed engagement, £400 was paid to a moneylender to clear that debt. £400, from the Duke's own purse. There was no secret engagement of 2 months. There was a bargain, struck on a terrace, in the dark. A desperate girl bought to spare his grace an honest match. Miss Whitfield is not a bride, she is a purchase. And you have all been applauding a fraud these 3 weeks, and calling it a love story. She let the poison spread through the silent room, and then she delivered the killing stroke, her eyes fixed on Clara. "Deny it, girl, if you can. Tell these good people you were not bought. Tell them there was ever anything real in it at all." The whole of society turned to look at Clara Whitfield. And Clara, who had known this must come some day, who had dreaded it, who felt now the old invisibility rushing back to swallow her, the poor relation exposed and shamed before all the world, opened her mouth to say she did not know what, some ruin or other, and found she could not speak at all, because the truth the Countess had told was very nearly the whole truth. And the one part that was false, that there had been nothing real in it, was the one part Clara could not bear to confirm, and had no right to deny, because she did not know, she had never known, whether the Duke felt for her the thing she had come to feel for him, and to claim love that was not returned would be a humiliation worse than the Countess's. So Clara stood silent, and the silence damned her, and the room began to murmur, and the Countess of Marsh smiled. And then the Duke of Ravenscar spoke. He did not speak in haste, or in fury, or with the cold cleverness that had turned the first trap. He spoke slowly, into the waiting silence. And there was something in his voice that made the whole room lean in, because it was a register no one there had ever heard from the ferocious Duke of Ravenscar. It was the sound of a man setting down his armor on purpose, in public, forever. "Lady Marsh," he said, "has told you the truth. I am going to tell you the rest of it, because she has left out the only part that matters, and because Miss Whitfield deserves to hear it as much as any of you, and I find I have been too great a coward to say it to her in private, so I will say it here, where I cannot take it back. Yes, 3 weeks ago, on a terrace, in the dark, I asked a young woman I had never met to pretend to be my bride, to save me from exactly the trap Lady Marsh had built for me, a trap some of you were invited to witness and can confirm. And yes, I paid her grandmother's debt, because she was drowning and I could reach her, and it was the least a man could do for the stranger brave enough to rescue him. It was a bargain. Lady Marsh is quite right. It began as a bargain, coldly, for £400 and one night's courage. He paused, and turned, and looked at Clara, only at Clara, as though the crowded room had emptied. And then something happened that was not in the bargain, and was not pretend, and that I have been hiding from her for 3 weeks, like the coward I apparently am. I fell in love with her, truly, entirely. Not the woman I paid to perform an engagement, the real one, the one I have spent 3 weeks of stolen honest midnights coming to know. The cleverest and bravest and most genuinely seen and unseen woman I have ever met, who agreed to be honest with me, and no one else, and thereby became the only person in my life who has ever known me, actually known me, and wanted nothing false from me at all. Lady Marsh asks Miss Whitfield to deny that she was bought. I will not let her answer, because there is a better truth to tell, and it is mine to tell. And it is this: I bought a pretend bride 3 weeks ago, and somewhere in these 3 weeks, she stopped being pretend. Not because of any bargain, but because I could not help it. Because a man cannot spend 3 weeks being truly seen by a woman like this, and not come to love her with the whole of whatever heart he has left. The engagement began as a lie. It is not a lie now. It became, without my leave, and against all my careful cowardice, the truest thing in my life. That is the story Lady Marsh so kindly invited me to tell. I thank her for it. I have been trying to find the courage for 3 weeks, and she has provided it, and I shall be grateful to her forever. The room had stopped breathing. The Duke of Ravenscar crossed the floor to Clara Whitfield, slowly, deliberately, in front of the whole of society, and he took her hand, and he went down on one knee before the poor relation in the middle of the Ashcombe ballroom, and there was not a trace of the cold, ferocious Duke left in him at all. Clara, he said, I broke our one rule. We agreed to be honest with each other and no one else, and I lied to you, by silence, every midnight, for 3 weeks, because I could not bear to trap a free woman with my feelings, when she had only ever agreed to pretend. I told myself it was honor, it was cowardice. I was afraid you did not feel it, and I would rather have had you as a pretend bride forever, than risk losing the midnights by asking for more. But I will not lie to you anymore, not even by silence, not even to protect you, because you told me at the start that you had spent your whole life being managed by people who thought you too small to be dealt with honestly, and I have gone and done exactly that, and I am ashamed. So here is the whole truth, out loud, in front of everyone, with nothing hidden. I love you, not the arrangement, you. And I am not asking you to keep pretending. I am asking you to stop, to end the pretense entirely, by doing the one thing that would make it, at last, completely true. Marry me, really. For nothing but that I love you, and I think, I hope, I have prayed, that somewhere in the midnights you might have come to. I did, Clara said. Her voice broke over it, and the tears were falling, but she was smiling, the whole invisible, careful fortress of her coming down at once, in public, forever. I did, weeks ago. The night you made me laugh in the library and I forgot to guard myself, and I saw you watching me laugh with no one there to perform for, and I thought, oh no, I have gone and made it real, and he will never know, because he was honest with me from the start, and I have no right to burden a man who is paying me to pretend with a love he never asked for. I have been hiding it exactly as long as you, and for exactly the same foolish, honorable, cowardly reason. We agreed to be honest, and we both lied about the only thing that mattered, and we have wasted 3 weeks, each certain the other was pretending. She sank down, careless of her gown, to kneel with him on the ballroom floor, face to face, the way honest partners seal a treaty between equals. Yes, you impossible, honorable, cowardly, beloved man. Yes, not for the £400, not for the security, for nothing at all except that I love you, and you saw me when no one in the world ever had, and I would rather be honestly yours than safely anyone's. Yes. And the Duke of Ravenscar drew his pretend bride into his arms in the middle of the Ashcombe ballroom and kissed her, really, before the whole of society. And the room, which the Countess of Marsh had assembled to witness a ruin, erupted instead into the roar of a crowd that has watched a cold man's heart break open in public, which is a thing no ballroom can resist. And the Countess of Marsh stood at the edge of it, having reached, like all the cruel of these stories, for the last weapon, and having, like all of them, put it into the hand of the very person she meant to destroy. She had tried to expose a lie. She had instead midwifed a truth. And she left the Ashcombe ball early, and was not much missed. And the story that ran to London by morning was not the one she had intended at all, but the far better one. How the ferocious Duke of Ravenscar had knelt in a ballroom and confessed that his arranged engagement had become the great love of his life, which is the kind of story the world will always choose to carry over the mean small truth, because the world, whatever its faults, would rather believe in love than in the Countess of Marsh. They were married in the spring, and it was, everyone agreed, no pretense at all. Clara Whitfield became the Duchess of Ravenscar, and she brought her grandmother to live in a warm wing of the great house. The old woman fussed over and safe at last, the £400 and all the fear it had carried a distant memory. And the marriage that had begun as a cold bargain on a dark terrace became a thing the whole county marveled at, because the ferocious Duke of Ravenscar, whom everyone had wanted and no one had known, and the invisible poor relation, whom no one had wanted and no one had seen, turned out, once they stopped pretending, to be the two halves of a single unlikely happiness. The man everyone wanted for the wrong reasons, and the woman no one wanted at all. Each at last wanted, truly, by the one person who had ever seen straight through to what they were. They kept, always, the one rule that had made them, honesty, with each other, whatever they showed the world. Only now there was nothing left to hide behind it, and so it became not a treaty, but simply the air of their marriage. Two people who had each spent a lifetime unseen, and who had promised, on a terrace, to be honest with each other and no one else, and who discovered that being truly seen by one person is the whole of what a lonely heart is starving for, and worth infinitely more than £400, or a coronet, or the good opinion of every countess in England. Years later, their eldest daughter, old enough to be curious about such things, asked her mother how she and Papa had met, and Clara, Duchess of Ravenscar, once the poor relation who made up numbers, considered how to tell it. "Your father asked me to pretend to be his bride," she said at last, "for one night, to save him from a trap. And I said yes, because I was poor and frightened and had a grandmother to save, and it was the maddest thing I ever did, and the best. We agreed it would be pretend. We agreed to end it respectably in a few weeks." She smiled at the memory, the old bright private smile she had once gone still to hide, and now gave freely. "And then we made the one mistake that undoes every arrangement of that kind, my darling, and I will tell it to you, so that you may make it too, some day, with the right person. We promised to be honest with each other, and you cannot be truly honest with a person, night after night, and go on pretending you do not love them. Honesty is the thing pretense cannot survive. We meant to pretend for a few weeks and part as friends. We were honest instead, and it made the pretense true, and we have been honestly, entirely, unpretendingly happy ever since. Your father says the Countess of Marsh should be thanked for it. I say it was the honesty. We are both right, but it was mostly the honesty." And across the room, the Duke of Ravenscar, who had of course been listening, honest men always listen, looked up and met his wife's eyes, the way he had first truly met them in an empty midnight library a lifetime ago, and said, "It was entirely the honesty. I have never lied to you since, Clara. Not once. Not even by silence." "I know," said the Duchess of Ravenscar. "It is the whole of why I married you, and the whole of why I stayed.